Hello and welcome everyone. We are about to start. We are so glad you guys are here. Alrighty, we're gonna go ahead and start. So hello and welcome. My name is Gregory Gale. I am the Director of Recruitment and Admissions at the NSU College of Psychology. The NSU College of Psychology offers a broad spectrum of programs at the bachelor's, master's, and specialist and doctoral levels. For more information about our programs, please visit us at psychology.nova.edu. Today, we have a very special group of individuals to talk about a very important topic. However, before we start, I just wanted to let you know that this session is being recorded and will be available on our website in 3 business days. Our website is nova.edu/sharkchats. Our webinar today is titled Sex Trafficking During a Pandemic. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our panelists. Our first panelist is Dr. Lenore Walker. Dr. Walker earned her doctorate from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey. She conducts research on various forms of sexual violence, especially battered women, sexual assault, sexual harassment, sex and human trafficking, false confessions of women, and child abuse. She's a clinical forensic psychologist who testifies in cases across the United States. She's involved in international psychological issues and has served as the chair of the American Psychological Association's Committee on International Relations in Psychology. She is the author of The Battered Women Syndrome and is a co-author of the Handbook of Sex Trafficking with Drs. Giselle Gaviera and Dr. Gopal. Our second panelist is Dr. Katerina Rosenblatt. She's a graduate of NSU's Conflict Analysis and Resolution program. She earned her doctorate in that field. She's a leader of the national movement to support and protect survivors of sex trafficking. Her nonprofit organization is There Is Hope for Me, located in Miami, and it has helped hundreds of youth survive and thrive after leaving the sex trafficking world. She's an international renowned speaker and author, and her new book is titled Stolen. Our third panelist is Theresa Beau. She was born and raised on Long Island, New York, and is the product of a single parent household, being the last of 8 children. She's married to retired NFL football star Dwayne Bowe of the Kansas City Chiefs. She's an entrepreneur, a philanthropist, and an author. She's also a survivor of sexual assault. And to quote from her bio, she truly believes that if one adult had educated her about child molestation and predators, she would have known what to do when faced with this situation. She's the executive director of the nonprofit Don't Touch Me and is the author of the book by the same name. So with that said, I am happy and it's a pleasure to introduce you to Dr. Lenore Walker.
Thank you, everybody. I'm so pleased to be here with you to talk about a topic that's difficult to talk about, but one that I agree with Theresa Beau. We really must talk about it. And I'm so pleased that both myself and on behalf of Dr. Gaviria, unfortunately, Dr. Gaviria had an emergency and she won't be with us this evening, but I'm going to do her presentation as well as my own. And then we've got two survivors who are really going to tell us what it's like, what they needed, and what helped them become who they are today. Because there, as Dr. Rosenblatt has said, there is hope for every one of us who has survived, and especially during this pandemic. So I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to put up Dr. Gaviria's slides. So let's see how I do this. Okay, and I'm going to put it on a slideshow for us. There we go. I'm always excited when it works. So let me start with talking a little bit about Dr. Gaviria, who is also a graduate of NSU and from the undergraduate psychology program, and she got her doctorate from Carlos Albizu University. She's bilingual and does a lot of international travel, especially in the Latin American community. And so what she's wants us to know about are the United Nations and the United States human trafficking protections. And we have laws that do help rescue both children and adults, and we're working transnationally with organized crime across the United States and across all the different countries. And many of us have indeed traveled so that we are aware of a lot of what is happening today. Let me just start with the definitions so that we understand them. That sex trafficking and human trafficking is the act of recruiting, harboring, transporting, providing, or obtaining a person for compelled labor or commercial sex acts through the use of force, fraud, or coercion. Important. The force, fraud, or coercion, unless you're a child. Because if you're a child, having sex with a child is against the law anyhow. You don't need to have there is no such thing as consent for a child. Human trafficking is not the same thing as human smuggling, but they may be together, and you don't have to require movement in order to have the definition. It's a form of slavery, modern slavery, and it's in the United States. In fact, we believe that at least a third of all cases that we know about are here in the United States. Traffickers do use violence, they use threats, they use lies, they use debt bondage, or all kinds of coercion in order to force women, men, and children to engage in commercial sex against their will. US citizens, foreign nationals, women, men, children, as I said, and LGBTQ community can be victims of sex trafficking. The most common, the ones most vulnerable, the ones most at risk are those who are runaway and homeless youth, victims of homes where there is domestic violence, where there's sexual assault as children, where there's wars or conflicts internationally or even here in this country, and those who are vulnerable because of social discrimination. They're often the ones who are targeted by the traffickers. It is a multi-billion-dollar industry. It is the second largest source of profit for organized crime. It's replaced guns. Unlike drugs, which was a huge source of profit for underground crime, trafficked people can be sold a number of times, unlike the drugs that get used up. The global profits, just try to take an understanding of the large scale of profit, $150 billion a year for traffickers, and 99 billion of which comes from commercial sexual exploitation. Now, during this pandemic, we believe that there are a staggering number of workers. 81% of the world's workforce has been locked down in this 2020 pandemic, 2.7 billion workers. And at the peak, we believe that school closures in 194 countries affected 90% of the world's students at every different level of schooling. What does that mean? Well, it means that children are at greater risk. We can't see them in school. We don't know what's happening to them. Money is a driving force of this especially during this pandemic. And children are much more often on the internet. We have some idea of statistics from the Trafficking in Persons report. We know that things are going on, especially in Europe, particularly with the Syrian war, where the same slave route, where children escaping with their family, many of them are plucked off by traffickers. Dr. Gaviria was going to talk a little bit about Colombia. I'll let her do that the next time because she has been back and forth and working with people in Colombia, which is her home. Family is located there as well. We try to protect children, particularly as best we can, from sex tourism. And you can see some of the signs on this particular slide that you can find if you travel. You can find pictures of these, particularly in restroom stops, so that if somebody is taken there, they can report it. We have trained truck drivers. We have trained airline flight attendants. People are aware of noticing, looking. If somebody looks like they don't belong together, if somebody looks like they need help, we have ways now of getting them help. In 2018, over half of the criminal trafficking cases were sex trafficking cases only involving children. So even though we know adults are also being trafficked, we know that the large number of child sex trafficking, many of them were in the foster care system. It's a high-risk place for these children. And we also know during the pandemic that online social media platforms are used to recruit and advertise targets of human trafficking. So we need to keep children alert. That's difficult because many people don't want to share this information with children. They want to think they're protecting them, but it's not protecting them if they don't know that's possible. The average child, if she's a girl, will enter the commercial sex trade between the ages of 12 and 14. 12 to 14, they're babies. For boys, it's even younger, just 11 to 13 years old. So we have to tell our children, and we must tell them early. So there's help that we can get. If you suspect that a victim of human trafficking, Homeland Security Investigations has a tip line. Here's the number. We'll give it to you again later, but it's 1-866-347-2423. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That number is available. If someone you know, call the National Human Trafficking Hotline. And here's the national one, 1-888-373-7888. We'll put it in the chat so that it'll be up for the rest of the presentation. Text the words "be free" or 233-733 in the United States, and in Canada, 833-900-1010. So as I said, I'll put this up on the chat and you'll have some other resources as well. So with that, I'm going to turn the program over to Dr. Katerina Rosenblatt. Dr. Rosenblatt has gotten her doctorate in conflict resolution from Nova Southeastern University. I'm proud to say that I was on her dissertation committee. She has helped so many people, and I've learned so much from her as well. So Dr. Rosenblatt, take it away.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walker, and thank you everyone for attending. I am Dr. Katerina Rosenblatt and the author of the book Stolen. My story began right here in South Florida, where I had been a victim of human trafficking. I was at a hotel with my mom when I was 13, and the first experience I had was similar to what Lenore was talking about, was sex tourism. There was a sex tourism trafficking ring network throughout the hotel, and my mom left my abusive father to get some peace. But unfortunately, the trafficking ring that was networked there was preying upon vulnerable children coming from single parent homes, coming from poverty, coming from vulnerability. And so, having had that in my background, I was targeted by the trafficking ring, and they approached me through an older girl who befriended me. Her name was Mary. She approached me at the pool and began mimicking everything that I would say. She would relay back to me. She had reflective listening skills. So she would say everything from having come from a broken home, understanding my pain. And that is one of the tactics that traffickers use to gain a child's trust. And as Dr. Walker said, the average age of entry into prostitution is 13. However, I did not know that this was prostitution. I didn't know it was sex trafficking. There was no definition for human trafficking at that time. And so I got recruited through this false friendship. False friendships are one of the main ways kids get recruited. And I'll just talk about that for a moment. Because we are in a pandemic, children are much more likely to be recruited online, especially if they have access to gaming systems. What does that look like? Well, when a child is involved in gaming, both boys and girls are targeted, and traffickers will approach them through participating in the game online and send them packages. So sometimes those packages may come as gifts, but many times they have a camera, which gives the predator access to the child right in their own home, right beneath their parents' noses without them even knowing. So if you have packages coming to your children's home or the clients you serve, and you did not order those, please investigate, because that is one of the tactics that traffickers are using during the pandemic, is to approach children through gaming systems, sending them cameras, sending them expensive gifts, all in the purpose of capturing images of children, playing out sexual activity, using that for online pornography and trading pornographic images, getting them to do commercial sex acts. And commercial sex does not necessarily mean that the victim is being paid, but somebody is getting paid. And so victims such as I was usually are not even aware that we're being victimized, because we're so used to being abused and taken advantage of that we've stopped listening to that inner voice that tells us this is not a safe person, this is not a good idea, this is not a safe situation. And so that's why it's so important to start the discussion in the home. Talk about safe families, just as Theresa Beau talked about, and I know she's going to expand on that. We have to have those difficult conversations and empower children to know the difference between healthy and unhealthy love, safe and unsafe friends. Going back to my story, Mary gained my trust over the course of a month. She groomed me, and that is the average grooming period, which I wrote about in my dissertation, which was my first book, called Trafficking in America. And I was very grateful to have Lenore Walker as my dissertation chair and part of my committee. And my NSU experience was amazing. But I will tell you that we are still just scratching the surface of this issue. Had I known at 13 that sex trafficking comes through false friends, I would never have accepted this woman's friendship. She took me to a hotel room there at the hotel I was staying at with my mom and introduced me to a 65-year-old man who said he would be a father to me. And she used what I call a daddy hole. When you haven't had that nurturing, loving father, you will cling on to any hope for someone to be that father figure to you and show you love and care and nurturing. And so as we walked into this man's hotel room, the sex tourist, the buyer, I heard Mary lock the door behind me. Now, Mary was a 19-year-old who probably had been a victim at some point in her life, but now became a recruiter. A lot of trafficking occurs through child-on-child recruitment or peer-to-peer recruitment, again, online social media, pretending to be someone who they're not. And so Mary introduced me to this man because I trusted Mary. She gained my trust and she exploited that. As the door locked, Mary began to negotiate my price with the buyer, and this 65-year-old man was willing to purchase me for $550 for my virginity. He asked me if anyone would hear me if I screamed. He asked me if I had anyone looking out for me, and I said my mother would hear me and I would scream very loud and she'll come looking for me. I had one person in my life who loved me and cared about me, and many children don't even have that in the foster care system. I was fortunate because that gave me the strength to fight for myself, the love of my mom, and the understanding that I had some value, some worth to somebody. I didn't understand that they were negotiating my price when Mary asked him, how much will you pay for her? And he said 500. And Mary said, no, she's a virgin. I want 550. And with that, the deal was done. But how were they going to get me to stay? They would try to get me to take the marijuana she prepared on a plate, but I wasn't going to fall for it. My mom had taught me to say no to drugs. My mom taught me values. And so I would never have willingly engaged in prostitution, gone along with the scheme or their plan. Children are tricked into this. They're manipulated. And once they get you, you're trapped and you don't have a choice to go back home. Fortunately for me, I had God and somebody fighting for me, my mom praying for me, and I was able to fight back and stand up for myself and say, I'm not going to take the drugs. And I don't know what you want, but you're not going to get it. Because in my mind, at 13, my frontal lobe was not fully developed. And so for males, it's not until they're 29, for females until they're 24. And Dr. Walker can correct me if I'm wrong, but that may be why there's so much fight or flight or freeze with teenagers. For me, I just knew I was scared and I was not safe. And I decided to fight back. And with that, the John kicked us out. And Mary became very angry. The friend that I thought I had, my best friend, somebody who showed love for me, now became a tormentor. And she said I could never tell my mom. I could never tell anyone. And I went back to the hotel room where my mom was cooking dinner, and I was crying, and she asked me what happened. And I couldn't tell her because I was afraid now. You see how they start using manipulation to create this invisible bond, this invisible chain, so that you feel like this person owns you, even though they have no right to you. And my mom said, I don't know what it is, but I don't have a good feeling about that girl, Mary. And I tell kids all the time, trust your parents when they tell you, don't hang around someone, and trust your instincts.
That's
and
so interesting, Katerina. Very interesting.
Thank you. And for the rest of the story, you guys can purchase a copy of my book, Stolen. because I know we have other wonderful panelists here. And so I just want to let you know that if it could happen to someone like me from middle class, you know, Jewish, Christian, it doesn't matter, race, socioeconomic background, it can happen to anyone. And during a pandemic, even more so. My first story, I will tell you, ended up with attempted murder and kidnapping. And I was very fortunate to be found by my mom on the side of the road by Houston's on Biscayne Boulevard. And I survived, but that was only the first trafficking experience. My second one would happen in my middle school, and I would not get away so easy. And it left me with a drug addiction. It left me with feeling used and abused, exploited and raped. And I wound up dropping out of middle school and going farther down that rabbit hole until God rescued me, my mom loved me, and I was able to find my way back to freedom. But I want you to know that if you've experienced abuse or exploitation, it's not your fault, and there is hope for you. So please reach out. Purchase a copy of Stolen. Anybody that purchases one tonight through our website, we will donate one to a survivor on your behalf, because we found that 1 in 3 middle schoolers are being recruited and 1 in 9 high schoolers, and they need your voice. They need your help, and we're all in this together. Thank you so much. And don't forget, if there was hope for me, there's hope for anyone. God bless you.
Thank you so much, Katerina.
That was beautiful.
What's a beautiful story, survival. Now we're going to turn to another story, a little bit different, but also a beautiful story. Theresa Beau, go.
Yes. How are you guys? And once again, I want to thank you guys for allowing me this platform, because child sex abuse, human sex trafficking is all preventable through education and awareness. And this is an amazing platform for awareness. So Dr. Kat, I want to say thank you again for, including me in on this and introducing me to who, needed to hear this. My story is a bit different. I was a young kid, the 8th of, my mom's last kid, and she used to leave me at home alone because she worked all the time, having 8 kids. But her boyfriend, most predators are people that we know, love, and trust. That's the sad part. So now that when I think back to being this kid amongst what I was amongst and my sisters and brothers dealt with, it was taboo in a lot of homes to talk about child sex abuse, to talk about anything that was inappropriate in a home. Fortunately, I was able to get out of New York on a track scholarship and get away to Kansas City, Missouri. So I escaped it. The sad thing is that I realized as an adult, I was running. And the same thing that I ran from, I actually ran into. So I was battered already. I was abused. I was already damaged, but I didn't know the damage was done until I finally came in touch with my childhood trauma. Once I came in touch with my childhood trauma, I just realized what being abused as a child did to me as an adult. It didn't dawn on me until I had children of my own. Both of my kids are under the age of 10. My daughter at the time when I confronted my childhood trauma was 2 years old. My son was 7 at the time. I realized that I didn't have one adult in my whole entire life speak to me about what to do if I was faced with a predator in my home or life. I immediately decided to talk to my kids, my daughter being 2 years old. I was like, let me see if she will understand. I started the movement, Don't Touch Me. And immediately I realized my kids needed to know that they can say, don't touch me. And that's what they should do. So speaking to my 2-year-old daughter at the time, my 7-year-old son, about what to do in the event that someone touches them inappropriate, or if they're faced with a predator, or someone that's a friend, a babysitter, the bus driver, a teacher, the daddy, the mom, anyone. They realize, and now they understand their safe, the safe spots, where people can touch, where people can't touch, just all the things that they should do. Once again, no one ever told me this as a kid. No one ever told me that I should speak up, that I shouldn't keep a secret. I didn't even know that after I told my mom and she dismissed it and she didn't believe me, that I should continue to go on and tell other people. So what I did instead is that I just bottled it up and I went through life and figured it out on my own. So my movement, when I talk about Don't Touch Me, is based on education and awareness. So I'm, you know, when I look at Dr. Kat and I watch how she works hand in hand with a lot of survivors, I decided to go the opposite route and focus on education and awareness. And through that, I created an elementary school curriculum because I felt like if I can get it at the core of the issue, a young child having the opportunity to actually hear about this. And the topic, unfortunately, is just something that so many people are afraid to talk to their children about. They almost feel as if the word sex is introduced too young, that is going to cause, you know, a negative effect with the child being promiscuous or just even entertaining the idea of having sex. And I know, you know, just for it to be true, that is not the case. You know, it's as simple as teaching a kid how to tie their shoe or look both ways when they cross the street or stop, drop, and roll, all the programs and just the things that we embed in our kids' lives and in their heads, brushing their teeth every day, multiple times a day. This is just as important, equally as important. So with my, with the educational platform, I'm working on a elementary school curriculum, like I said, and, you know, April is National Child Sexual Abuse Prevention Month. So that's the month that I'm looking to get the curriculum in school. And with that, the book that Greg was referring to is called My Mommy's Boyfriend. It touches on the issue that I had. I faced it with my mommy's boyfriend, but it's not a story, or it's not a book that's pretty much telling my story. It's just educating children to recognize the signs, recognize what an inappropriate touch is, making them aware of talking to their teachers, talking to other parents, you know, a trusted individual. It's like every child should have a trusted individual, even if it's not their parents, to talk to. So the way this all ties in is 90% of human sexual traffic survivors were molested as a kid. So if we can, you know, get to the core of the problem and help the children before they become adults to prevent getting sexually abused, we could potentially decline the statistics when it comes to human sex trafficking as well. So at this point, I'm speaking to, you know, the Board of Education for Broward County, Miami-Dade County. I've been in touch with different mayors in, you know, different cities, and we're working diligently to get the books and to get the curriculum in schools. And, you know, don't touch me. If you guys have children, if you guys know any children, if you don't have children, it's okay to talk to them about it and let them know that they have a voice and they should use it. So that's pretty much my journey. And, you know, like I said, my book is an elementary-based book. So I encourage you guys to just look it up and try to educate the kids as much as you can, any kids that you guys come in touch with.
Thank you so much, Theresa. So you can see we've got some stories, sad when they happen, but so successful in overcoming. And let me tell you a little bit from a psychological perspective, what we can do, those of you who are mental health professionals who are on this call, let's talk a little bit. I'm going to put up some slides. Give me one moment. Well, I think I'm going to just have to go through a bunch of them. Sorry about this, but here we go to my presentation. So I want to talk a little bit about who are the survivors. We've been talking about them, but in the United States, as we've been saying, it's mostly juveniles and young women who we know about. We know that there are others who are still engaging in commercial sex. Some want to be rescued, some do not. And we believe that that is their choice, but we want to be out there for them. Smaller numbers of men are known. Many of them are in the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transsexual, and questioning communities. Around the world, rescues come at all ages. And again, it's very difficult during the pandemic to do the kind of rescuing. Like many battered women, which is the group that I started studying, many those who are in commercial sex have left their traffickers several times. Like many battered women, they're ambivalent, especially during this pandemic when earning a living is so difficult for so many people. There are not that many jobs out there. Like many battered women, Many of them fear the abuser, and they fear survival alone. Many of them are there for survival sex rather than because they want it as a job. Like many battered women, most of them have become dependent upon their trafficker, but they don't trust other people to really help. And like many battered women, many are more resilient than they really believe they are. Many of them can heal and they can move on to having a good life. Many of them were also harmed by women. Unlike battered women, this was very difficult for me to deal with initially because I wanted to believe that it was only the men who were doing this. But many of the women, to survive, become the tool of the sex trafficker. And so they also can harm other women like Mary did in Katerina's story. So if you are a mental health therapist, or if you're going to be a client, hang on, because this is going to be a bumpy ride. It's possible, but there's lots going on. As we are learning, many of the people have been exposed to trauma before they've been captured. Many of them have lived in abusive and dysfunctional families of origin. Some of them had domestic violence, some child sexual abuse. Many lived in poverty, cultural issues, exposed to substances. Many of them had neurological changes. Kat was talking about the fact that we know that brains don't fully mature until the mid-20s in both girls and boys, a little bit later in boys than in girls. But if you don't have proper nutrition, or if you've been abused, physically abused, and had head injuries, you may have even more neurological changes. Sometimes you have changes in just your emotional biochemicals. And so depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, all mental health disorders that are treatable. Many of the children are without protection and they need the security. They don't get enough of it, even if they're in child protective services or state care. Grooming behaviors and the lures, as Kat and Theresa were talking about, create distrust. You don't know who to trust. If they're nice to you, maybe they're going to hurt you anyhow. You need to rebuild your social network. For some of the people who are trafficked with other people in what they call stables, that may become their new social network. So it's not just leaving a trafficker, but also that network. The younger the child, when they're captured, the more likely that their development, their normal development, is going to be interrupted. And if you're a teenager, there's a lot of confusion between sex and love. And learning to have loving relationships is much more difficult. So these are things we have to deal with in treatment. I talked about some of the similarities with domestic violence. You can see some of them here on this slide. The dependency, the new social supports. Many of the girls feel that they love the trafficker, especially in those lures where he does create a dependence and a seduction to her. And many of them, like battered women, lose the ability to escape because they're so busy coping with staying as safe as possible. They get rewards for doing what they're told to do, for being good girls. And that changes how they relate to other people. It leaves them, as I said, with high levels of anxiety, depression, numbing, other kinds of mood regulations. Some of them have attentional disorders, and some of them re-experience events, sometimes if there's a trigger, but sometimes just in their own mind.
Dr. Walker?
Yes.
I just wanted to let you know that we're not able to see your slides.
Oh dear. I wonder what we can do about that. Well, that's too bad. Let me see if I can put them back. Let's see If I can slide share again. How about now?
Yes, we can see them.
Oh, thank you for telling me. That's great. Okay, so what I was saying is that there is a cycle of violence, much like the cycle of violence. I'm afraid to put it on, I'm going to play from the current slide. Let's see if that works. Oh, there. So there is a cycle, you know, in my battering and domestic violence work, I looked at this cycle of violence, that it doesn't happen all the time. But this kind of a cycle is very different. The main tactic that the trafficker uses is to institute that cycle of intimacy and violence. So it's both. And the trafficker uses the victim's desire for affection to lock her into that relationship with him. He'll choose some victims as his surrogates, as I said, and they go from being victim to victimizer to being victim again. So it's a cycle that continues. A lot of the survivors have body image and physical problems. Many of them who have been sexually assaulted have chronic pain, and there's lots of work that we have to do around body image. We need to use trauma-specific treatment. And in using that, there are 5 specific things. I have them up on this slide. Safety, empowerment, so she feels back in control of her life. Choice, she has to have choice. She may elope from treatment, but we take her back because we understand. Collaboration with mutual goal sharing and trustworthiness. We must be honest, authentic, and yet we also have to have very clear boundaries. There's a whole lot of different intervention programs. I want to give us some time for some questions, so I'm not going to go through all of them, but the slides will be available for those of you who are interested in them. Important, we want to use a narrative. We want to validate what the survivor has gone through and listen to her. We want to re-empower her using a feminist approach and analysis of power. And this is for the men as well as for the women. They also need re-empowerment. And we want to identify and control the trauma triggers. So we want to use as many of the psychological methods that we have. We have lots of techniques, but we want to include it in looking at relationships for our survivors. And the end part of it is we want to promote positive growth and resilience. Important for any of you who want to do this work, sharpen your listening skills. You're going to have to listen to things that are pretty horrible. And you need to only respond with empathy. And even if you don't understand, you may ask the person to explain it further. Make sure you hear what they're saying, because it's easy not to want to hear it. It's hard work. But remember that if the trauma survivor talks to you and shares what's happened, they are reliving it in their mind. And so they may go off on tangents. That's a way of blocking some of those flooding memories. So write it down, what you hear, either immediately or afterwards, because you want to go make sure that you've heard it correctly the next time around. It's going to be more than once that you'll go through it. I gave you some of the language common in the commercial sex industry, just so you get a sense of it. Daddy, madam, bottom bitch, bottom girl, seasoning, choose up, wifeys, wife-in-law, sister, wife, when there's a group, Johns, tricks, dates, track or stroll or blade, kiddie stroll, out of pocket, exit fee. You don't get out of that easily. Sometimes you're even branded by the trafficker. Here are just some of the ideas of what happens. So take a good look at tattoos if somebody comes in with a tattoo, because it may not be a choice of their own. If it looks wrong, it probably is. So what do we do to change the shame into survival? Well, we've got to reconsider prostitution as a violation of human rights and a violation of civil rights. We have to understand it as survival sex. We have to understand its impact on people's quality of life, and that sometimes they use substances because they've been hooked on it and because it's a way of surviving. There is potential for crime, and so we have to be able to offer our ability to help people. And there is damage to health, so we've got to get them to medical help as well. And it can continue on to the next generation if we don't provide those kinds of supports. So remember, the goal for sex trafficked victims is to live a violence-free life. Just like the goal for working with a battered woman is to live a violence-free life. It's not necessarily that you have to leave the abuser, but when you're talking about sex trafficking, they may have no choice but to leave that life and leave the abuse. We can help victims find wraparound services. There are lots of safe homes throughout the United States and around the world. We can help them get medical care, substance abuse treatment, special foster families or residential homes, individual group therapy. We have all these techniques that are available, and we can help provide them. We have to be careful, those of us who are providers, to make sure we don't develop compassion fatigue. The burnout and stress-related symptoms experienced by caregivers and other helping professionals just working with traumatized people over an extended period of time can cause what they're calling compassion fatigue. So we have to take good care of ourselves. And with that, I want to once again remind you of the National Human Trafficking Hotline, toll-free, available 24/7 in more than 200 languages, and it's up here on the screen, but it's also in the chat box. So I'm going to turn it back now to Gregory Gale, and let's see if we have some time for some questions.
Well, yes, we do have several questions, and it really is a variety of different questions. The first is several of our attendees asked about books, your books. So if you wouldn't mind talk about the availability of your books or add that information to the chat feature.
Okay, Katerina, why don't you go first?
Okay, thank you. I think Dr. Walker was kind enough to drop the link for my book, Stolen. It's on my website, thereishopeforme.org. And this is my personal journey out of sex trafficking and domestic violence, which I was very fortunate to have met Dr. Walker while going through the process of my own divorce out of an abusive marriage. So out of the trafficking, which happened to me from 13 to 17, I married into a family that was connected to the Colombian cartel. And that was a very, very difficult journey. Leaving was much, much harder than staying. I was very fortunate to meet Lenore the first day at Nova. And so I very much treasure her being in my life and being part of my journey, because when you come out of exploitation, domestic violence many times is a normal fit, unfortunately, because of the control, the power and control seems familiar. You haven't quite yet gained your personal power back. And I loved everything that Dr. Walker talked about with empathizing and empowering and just really giving survivors back their voice. So my story, Stolen, is available on Amazon as well as Barnes & Noble. But if you do purchase a copy through our website, thereishopeforme.org, we will donate a copy to a survivor, because we get requests around the world. I've done legislative work in Germany fighting pornography online, here in the US. And so survivors need these resources, such as my book and Theresa's book, to continue on their journey of healing and hope. Thank you so much for the opportunity to share.
Thanks.
Great. Here's, well, I don't know if you can see it, but I'm holding up our handbook on child sex, well, there, on sex trafficking. And I did put that in the chat box as well. It's a more academic book. And so for those of you who are teaching classes or are in academia or who want to read a bunch of stories, we have, it's an edited book with a lot of good people who are doing the work around the world.
And like I said, my book is a children's illustrated book. It's very interactive, it's very colorful, it's for elementary age children. And the great thing is my children actually wrote a song that is interactive with the book. So there's a QR code at the very back of the book where, you know, it gives a song for the kids to sing along with. It's colorful, it's fun. And like I said, this experience in the education of child sex abuse, it doesn't have to be dark and ugly. This is actually something that is entertaining. Not like the subject is entertaining, but just the book, just to make light of the situation.
Great.
So we do have some other questions, and it's really for all of the panelists. Concerns this topic and whether it should be geared by gender. So for instance, someone had a question concerning grooming for boys versus girls. So how do you have this conversation, and does gender, the gender of the recipient, play a role in how the conversation takes place?
I can speak to that if that's okay.
Sure, go.
So in our work doing outreach to schools, you know, we found that 30% were boys who came forward. And again, having a survivor voice present helped children identify if they had been exploited. And I created a trafficking wheel and an assessment tool, which I'd be happy to share. You can contact me via my website. But boys are recruited a little bit differently. And I'll share one story of a survivor that I met. His girlfriend recruited him in high school, and boys tend to have a sense of responsibility for providing for their families. And so coming from a single parent home, his mom was not able to provide adequately for all of the four children. And so he was presented with the opportunity to engage in commercial sex for payment. And in return, he wound up becoming addicted to drugs. He received some money to help his mom, thinking he was helping his family. Of course, his mother did not know until my daughter, who had helped me work with the survivor, we took him to a rehab, and that's when I had to break the news to his mom. And he unfortunately had become addicted to drugs. And that is the problem that happens with trafficking, as I mentioned in my story as well. In my middle school, I became addicted to cocaine. It was a long battle fighting that, but thankfully I was able to be rid of that addiction, you know, praying for that I would be released from that, because I did not want to go to jail. And so I made a deal with God, just to be honest. I'm very grateful that it did not carry me into adulthood. But for some survivors, it is a lifelong journey. And now they're using heroin, which is a monster drug, because it is so difficult for survivors to break free from that. But that's been my experience working with boys. Many times it is through friends, it is through a girlfriend, or it is with the proviso of providing for their families.
Dr. Walker, Theresa?
Yeah, I was going to say that I also think that there's some difference, there's some similarities. Boys are often recruited by other males. And sometimes I've been working with some who have been recruited using pornography and sharing jokes, and the grooming is a very slow process where you know, they're teenage boys, middle school or ninth graders who are just becoming interested in their sexual feelings. And so they are recruited on the athletic field in some cases. And they don't know what's happening until It's a lot of fun until all of a sudden there's touching. And there's a game on one group I've been working with. I learned about a game that's been on YouTube called Waiting, where they learn to dress up their penis and their testicles and show them off to people. And it's kind of getting away with something that sounds like it's just, boys will be boys horseplay, but it's introduction into sex without love and into commercial sex. So there are a variety of ways, and that's another one of them.
So there was a question concerning what do you suggest for people who don't want to leave the environment, and especially doing it in a non-judgmental way?
Well, I think that one of the things that I suggest is that at least they take care of themselves, that they make sure that they get medical care, that they make sure they get psychological care, that they try to get off drugs if they can, and that they really try very hard to develop a social system that's outside of the trafficking life if they can. Education is another way. I know Dr. Gopal, who's one of our co-authors with Dr. Gavaria and myself, holds conferences and often has a lot of the survivors who have been able to leave once they got an education and had another way of being able to earn a living. So there are many things that you can do to strengthen yourself, and as you prepare yourself. Eventually you're going to have to leave, but you have to prepare to do it. You'd have to do it safely.
And Theresa, talk about when is the appropriate time to introduce this topic to children.
There's no age, that is a set age. If you do your research, if you look into education, there's no set age. So I look at 2 years old now. Now that I know that it works and I've done it myself and I've seen others do it since, I've been on this journey, it's like kids they understand at a very, very early age. So the longer that we wait, kids are abused and trafficked, as young, very, very young. Let's just say very, very young, because the age, is from 2 to 18 most of the times. But the earlier, the better. Once your kid can understand, when they can understand how to brush their teeth, tie their shoe, talk, communicate, it's important to open up the dialogue with your child. And this is for sure an easy way to do so. I mean, every kid that I know that read this book, I'm just going to be honest, it's like they start asking those uncomfortable questions that parents are scared to, discuss. So it's just doing it as soon as possible.
And I would just,
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I would just like to echo what Theresa said. She brought up an excellent point that if they are being abused and exploited at any age, then why aren't we talking to them at that age? I can tell you as a survivor that I have gone back to my middle school and talked to the school and said, why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you tell me? It's only fair to give them a head start.
I think we also have to remember that when we talk to children, I haven't read your book yet, Theresa. I'm going to get a copy of it.
Okay.
But I think it's very important to use the right language for children. You would talk to a 2-year-old very differently than you're going to talk to a middle schooler, and very differently than you would talk to a high schooler. And so, we have to adapt the discussion to the child's age and the child's ability to understand. But just recently, I worked with a child who was 2.5 years old, and she was very verbal about what was happening to her. So children know when they're being abused, they know what to tell you.
Mm-hmm.
I definitely agree with the age limit. That's why, the book I wrote focuses on elementary kids, because I feel like it's the core of the issue. We starting very, very young. So you're absolutely right with the different age groups and the different levels of reading. So makes sense.
We're getting several requests concerning how to purchase your books again. So that's something we will definitely share as part of the follow-up to this presentation.
Amazon, go on. I don't know whether Theresa, yours is on Amazon, but our book is on Amazon and Kat's is on Amazon. But Kat's, you can get a special signed copy of her book, and the special to get it to somebody else as well. If you go through her website, which I reposted, there is hope for me.
Thank you. And Theresa's website is also there, Don't Touch Me, where you can get a copy of her book, My Mommy's Boyfriend. Thank you for supporting us and supporting survivors.
Thank you.
So we are almost at the end of our conversation. And so what I would like for each of you to leave us with some parting thoughts or parting words. So we'll start off with Theresa.
I'm sorry, can you repeat that question? I was reading these comments. I'm like, wow, this is very touching, guys. I'm sorry.
Yes, yes.
I was just touched by, just people understanding the journey and, speaking up. So this is the first time as an adult I've used my voice on this topic. And, just to see how many people it's touching is like really touching my heart. So if you can repeat that question, I would appreciate it.
Sure, that's perfectly fine. I just was saying that we are towards the end of our presentation, and I wanted to ask each of our panelists to leave us with some thoughts or words at the end of our session.
Okay, for me, if I had just one adult talk to me as a kid, I wouldn't be here, unfortunately, with all of you amazing people to share this story. Now that I do know that I have a voice, and it's a voice that I have, pretty much brushed under the rug for years. I never spoke about this. My husband learned about this issue and this dark secret of mine just last year. And we've been married for years, been together for 11. So the trauma, just everything that comes from being abused and not talking about it is devastating. So I'm just encouraging everyone on this call, a kid, it don't have to be a child, just speak to a child and give them a chance. It's up to us adults, child safety is an adult's job.
Thank you. Dr. Rosenblatt?
Thank you. What powerful words. I would just say, for those of you who have children or are working with survivors or at-risk youth, don't be afraid to have the discussion. Get engaged in your child's life. Find out who their friends are. As Dr. Walker mentioned, there's a lot of recruitment of boys and girls through social media, online, peer-to-peer recruitment, but especially social media during a pandemic and the online gaming systems. If you receive packages from Amazon that you did not get, investigate, because it may be from someone who you don't want in your child's life. And finally, if you have experienced any of these, remember that it's not your fault and we're here for you. There's hope. Take down the phone numbers, take down the text numbers, because you who are watching, you may see something. And if you see something, please say something, because you could save somebody's life today. Thank you.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
And Dr. Walker?
Beautiful. I can't say it better than they've said it. But you can contact me at my email address at Walker, L-E, @nova.edu. Even though I'm an emeritus there, I still have email. And so you can reach me there. If I see some people would like some of the slides, and we will definitely, if you send me an email, I will send them out to you so that you can have them. Remember, talking helps. Even if you're just talking to a friend, and psychotherapy helps, because we're taking these secrets and moving them out of the secret area. And we're beginning to process it and understand it's not your fault. And you tell people again and again, it's not their fault, because shame is one of the things that helps people keep it secret. So that's our job. It's the work, this work is hard work, but it's so rewarding to see how people go on with their lives and really flourish. So I'm proud to be part of it. I'm proud to be working with these strong, wonderful women. And I'm proud that Nova's really doing something about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you
So-
for Giselle Gaviria, who's sad that she can't be here, but the next one we do, you will see her.
So I would like to thank the panelists for this really eye-opening discussion. I know I learned a lot, and based on the audience discussion, I know they did as well. As a reminder, this webinar was recorded and will be available on our website, which is nova.edu/chartchats. We'll also be emailing the PowerPoint to the attendees. So
Okay.
thank you so much for sharing your time with us, and have a good night.
And this is to moving the secrets out, as Dr. Walker said.
Bye to everybody.
Thank
you.
you. Awesome. Thank you so much. And I'm ending the presentation. Have a good evening.